Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Manifest. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first and foremost, we have Mick, Zeke, as well, having dinner with obviously Beverly, but also they're inviting over Jarrett and Sarah, and obviously Michaela being a little worried. It's like, the fact of the matter is them getting together. Is it really that much of a coincidence? Like, once again, out of anybody he can end up dating, it's Sarah. And even Sarah later on bringing up, like, yeah, I had him look into my mom's case. I mean, honestly, I was initially getting you to look into my mom's case, but, if I had gotten you to look into my case, me and Jarrett would have never gotten together. It's like, oh, yeah, that is interesting. So, obviously, there is that aspect, and I think that's going to play further and more into this still budding love triangle to a certain extent, because it is the thing of, regardless of everything, Michaela will always have a special place in the heart for Jarrett. I mean, they were dating for a long time. They were engaged. Well, he had like proposed to her. She hadn't decided, but they were like borderline engaged. They were going to get married until everything went sideways. I mean, he broke up his current relationship just to be with her and just for them not to end up together. It's a whole complicated mess. So but now you see I guess now seeing him dating someone and it being kind of real, Michaela's like that past is kind of rearing its ugly head, and obviously Zeke's kind of feeling that. He kind of vibed it last episode, which I'm surprised I never thought about that till right now. His empath ability is very similar to Vibe from Cisco, aka Vibe from The Flash to a certain extent. Not a one for one. I mean, I guess you can make the argument the callings are very much kind of vibing, but nevertheless. While this is all happening, while they're getting prepared for the dinner and everything, Michaela has a calling about the dark clouds again, and then all of a sudden Ben is happening because he's calling for Grace, and Grace's like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "Yeah, there's water," and she's like, "Ben, there's no water here." Which I know, this seems so interesting to me that the callings are so visceral. I feel like they were in the past, but not to this extent. It felt like, even to the point, the fact is Ben couldn't tell the difference. To me, that speaks volumes, because it's usually they have an understanding, okay, what I'm seeing, oh yeah, no one else is seeing this, but it's for him in that moment, it felt so real, he couldn't tell that it wasn't, I mean, like I said, this happened, even last episode, because Michaela, well, not last episode, the episode before last, where Michaela saw the dark cloud, but Drea was like, no, there's nothing out there, so it's they still can't 100% decipher, it used to be that they used to be a little clearer, but now it's blurring the line so much, and maybe that speaks volumes of eventually these callings are going to get so visceral, so real, that you will kind of go crazy because you won't be able to tell what's real and what's a calling and what's not. But nevertheless, Ben ended up, all that water and everything was him having one. Then all of a sudden, who shows up at the door? None other than Egan, which obviously Grace is not happy about. She's even like, "Ben, let's talk for a minute." And he's like, "Oh," because he knows Angelique by where she was sitting. It's Angelique, Egan, Angelique, get him a cup of water or something like that. And it's just oh yeah, me and I don't remember if it was then or later on. He's like, "Yo, me and the professor, me and Team Stone, working together again." So regardless, so that's kind of an interesting development. Even him getting manipulating Angelique, but "Oh yeah, when I lost my parents, it's yeah, it was hard for me." Because it's "Oh, how'd you end up with the Stones?" It's right, Michaela rescued me, and they're family. So he's "Oh yeah," pulling on her heartstrings a little bit. And it's "Oh, Ben was going to show me around." So she's "Oh, okay, cool." Obviously, Grace is "Get that man out of my house." It's "I need him." No one understands and is better at the callings than him. That speaks volumes with his photographic memory and everything. So he can always pick up details that Ben and others might have a shortcoming with. So it's all right, I gotta work with him. The moment I'm done with this calling, the fact of the matter is he'll be out of the house. Then, it's Egan's "Oh, look at all of this. Oh, look at this very beautiful mind setup you've got here." Because that's also the thing, the only people who know about Ben's setup are the core people. I'm sure he's never really brought that up to any of the other passengers they've ever crossed paths with. So very few passengers know about that. So this is the first time kind of an outsider to everything. Well, still a passenger, but an outsider to everything being "Whoa, look at this. This looks a little crazy." The fact that you've got all this information on so many people, and it's yeah, so many passengers are unaware of Ben, and Ben knows so much about all of them, and he's kind of keeping track of them. So it is an element of, you could see from an outside perspective of outside of this core group, it's Ben's a little obsessive, he's kind of crazy about this. But it turns out Egan saw the same thing, but also he saw a lion, and now they're comparing notes of okay, so Michaela had it, Ben had it, and now Egan had it. At first it's kind of Michaela's wondering if it has anything to do with, well, initially she was wondering if it had anything to do with Sarah coming over, but it turns it doesn't, because obviously the dark cloud represents, like, what's happening over Eureka, so it's an interesting episode where, like, so much is happening. There's just so much happening all at once. First and foremost, you have the bleeding, like, Michaela bleeding from her eyes, and then later on, Ben and Egan see the lion bleeding, and at the same time there's the whole situation with Sanvi working on the piece of wood from Noah's Ark, and her eyes start bleeding, like moments they're trying to do experiments because they're trying to replicate, like, that purple lightning again, and in the process, her eyes start bleeding. Michaela shows up because it's like, they also look at the board. The only photo that was still wet was Sanvi, so it's kind of saying, like, maybe Sanvi's in trouble. Even, like, later on, there's that Alzura book, and it's like, well, not the first time we've run into it, and not the first time it's glowed, but looking at, like, some of, like, the people that died, like, those who were lost, he happens to look, and it's like, one of the pictures in there is Sanvi. I am curious if you actually go back to season 2, like, if you freeze frame it and zoom in, will you see that picture of Sanvi? I wonder, is that even there back in season 2, foreshadowing all of this? Because Ben's like, how did I not notice that before? And Egan's like, well, we see what we want to see, you know. So it begs, once again, like, I'm so curious, is that a detail they had there since then, or is it kind of supposed to represent the fact that so much has shifted, so much has changed, because this is post Sanvi killing the Major, so maybe that's kind of played a role in it. Maybe it wasn't always there. Maybe it was a different person, and maybe it constantly keeps changing, or like I said, maybe it's always been Sanvi. Whatever the case may be, it presents, you know, an interesting aspect to it, because Michaela shows up being like, yo, what's up? Because initially it's kind of like, okay, they end up finding out that there's a folklore about this, that basically it was kind of like during the time of flood, so it's like, okay, if a lion bleeds, like, Christ's tears of blood, that means you need to get to, like, higher ground or you're going to drown. Basically, this village mocked an old lady and tricked her into going to the mountains by pretending like, oh, we painted this lion's eyes to pretend like it's crying blood, and the joke is on them because they ended up dying. So it's like, whoa, so the whole, like, God punished them by, like, saving this lady, but also punishing them for doing that. I mean, it's like, to be fair, it's like, well, why was the Noah Ark thing supposed to happen anyway? It's kind of supposed to be a punishment of kind of, once again, I'm not well versed in the Bible. I'm under the impression like it was kind of like the wipe the slate clean type of situation, so it's not too crazy to think about. I mean, just my ignorance on the subject and just the vague bits I know about the Bible, some pretty messed up stuff in there. Some pretty messed up stuff. I'm not trying to get into like a religious debate with anyone. I'm not trying to like shame anyone or do anything. Like, I'm just saying, like, in retrospect, like when you think about some of the stuff that goes on, you're like, man, that's some jacked up stuff. It's crazy. That's all I'm saying. I'm not trying to like shoot or shit on anyone's religion. I'm just saying it's you gotta admit that's some wild shit that goes on in like the Bible. Once again, coming from someone who knows very, very, very little. Nevertheless, moving on. So initially they're thinking like Sanvi's lying is what this is supposed to be, like, because it's supposed to be like, because naturally the lion crying blood is supposed to be a warning sign. So now it's like, okay, it's a warning sign of like the flood that's coming, but also someone's lying, in particular Sanvi. So, and Sanvi eventually admits about Noah's Ark, and obviously bringing it up to Ben and Egan, which is like, oh, Egan be like, oh, she's doing a better job than your insider, that being Sanvi. So the developments keep going with Sanvi, even though when Sanvi tells the truth, it doesn't reverse her condition. So it's like, there's still lies going on here. So she confronts Vance, and Vance knows what else is being kept, but he's like, nah, like, don't worry about it. Like, Sanvi, don't worry her about it, because to be fair, he knows Sanvi's beating herself up about it. Like, she has so much guilt about it. So when the time comes, like, she's like, just tell me, we're A2-8ers, we're in this together, like, I'm here to help you. But Sanvi's like, I accept my death. She's like, I can't be saved. Like, no, even if I tell you the truth, it can't be undone. Because for her, it's like, I killed the Major. Like, there's no undoing this. I can't bring her back to life. Well, once again, we still don't know if there will be a situation where she's coming back or not. It is just interesting that she happens to disappear just when the tail fin... Well, I mean, like, the tail fin disappears just as she dies, and it's like, I think that'd be the ultimate, like, irony that your big bad ended up coming back, because, you know, especially with her daughter being a part of the storyline and everything. We'll see whether that ends up becoming a thing or not, but nevertheless, when it's all said and done, though, Sanvi admits what she did to... it's like, yo, I killed her, I killed the Major, and afterwards, the blood disappears, because that was like, you know, and it's like, and the question then becomes like, well, why did this happen? It's like, well, maybe it's because it was compounding lies, that basically the callings or whatever broke me because it was just all finally stacking up. My lie about the Major, my lie about Noah's Ark, like that all became too much. And for her, she feels like I'm going to be the one to sink the lifeboat. I need to like, you can't worry about me, because also like she's in a position where she can't get the callings anymore. It's also like, obviously Zeke's circumstances are very different. He had guilt about his sister. The callings allowed him to kind of make peace with that. He ended up beating his death day. Obviously, Michaela had, grief about like blaming herself about what happened to Evie. And obviously like she was able to come to remedy that with Evie's mom and dad. So there's an element to that, but it's also like for Zombie, it's like it's a different situation because Zeke blamed himself for his sister's death. He wasn't directly involved with murdering her, But even Michaela's like, honestly, I'm not going to shed tears about it. The Major did all the terrible stuff that she did. She promised you that she'd have a cure for Zeke, and all the experimenting she did on the passengers is like, the fact of the matter is like, if her death, like if there's a like definition of justifiable, like you doing what you did, but still it's a thing for Zombie. It's like, regardless of anything, I killed her, like. That can't be overshadowed. And it's like, you need to arrest me, which she's like, no, I'm not going. It's like, no, like I compromised my beliefs because as, scientists and a doctor do no harm. And so she broke that oath. And it's like, you have your job and your responsibilities. Because also for her, it's like, probably in her mind, it's like, if you don't do what you're supposed to, once again, we saw the aftermath of like choosing not to do what you're kind of told to do with, meth heads. It's like, what happened there? Like things kind of spiraled out from there. So it's like, it's once again interpreting what the callings are actually trying to tell you to do. So for Michaela's like, I was kind of brought here for a reason, that maybe like this is supposed to be like you were meant to be saved, that the callings are trying to give you a way out of this. We'll see once again whether or not like Zombie can reverse that, because it's like, once again, she can't really save herself because she can't get the callings anymore, which then once again has been the point I've always constantly made, is like, because she can't save herself, technically they can't, all the other passengers are kind of doomed on that front. We'll see. But especially because like obviously like I brought up the Alzura book, but there's also like they're flooding in like that basement area, and it's like, so it's like, right, there were already holes in our lifeboat, we just didn't realize it, and now like obviously when Zombie admits the truth and everything, it dries up and everything. So Ben needs Egan's help trying to figure everything out, and Egan's like, yeah, but you haven't told me everything. It's like, really, like, come on, like, it's like, you only told me everything because you needed to. It's like, to be fair, dude, you haven't proven yourself to be the most trustworthy person, considering, like, the shady stuff you did the first time you ran into Ben. Also, the drugging and kidnapping him. Like, come on, dude. You expect him to tell you everything? It's like, why? You guys kind of run off handcuffed. You in particular trying to lead the charge, and, it's like his influence over some of the, passengers. So it's like, it's not like you presented yourself as the best ally. Ben has proven himself time and time again with how he's helped, other passengers. So it's like, so it's like, Ben's like, all right, it's going to take a couple of days to break everything down, but let's break down like the basic information of what we know. And then we see Egan stealing his flash drive. So he's basically going to become the new Ben, which is interesting because it kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Andre situation, of like how Andre went off and kind of started that church because like, people believed in this and kind of looked at the those who returned as like angels. Andre was kind of ignoring his callings and stuff like that. He felt special. He felt like, people looked at him as like he was somebody. So it kind of pitted him against like Ben and them. So it kind of seems like we're kind of doing that to a similar extent, because Egan's like, Ben's not going to be able to save you guys. I'm going to be able to. Like, look at all this information they've been kind of hoarding and keeping to themselves, like not telling any of us. I'm giving this information to all of us. Or at the very least, he's going to keep the information to himself just so he can hoard over the others and use it to kind of make them fall in line, in a sense of, I know what's going on. Because I think he's someone that is going to go off half-cocked, because, Ben's looking at it, and he's looking at the boat and everything. Like, he's like, so these people in the water, they jumped. Like, obviously there was no, like, they have no way of dealing with the callings and stuff like that to make him go away. So they jumped ship. But then Grace was like, how do you know that they jumped ship? And Ben's like, well, to be fair, they could have been pushed. And she's like, do you think that's what the calling's telling you to do? Push people off the lifeboat? And Ben's like, well, there has to be another way. I think that's the point. Once again, this entire thing, like the trio of the meth heads, Corey, Jace, and Pete, it was a test. everything that they've been a part of, every calling, everything since the beginning of the series, them helping people, them doing this and doing that, has all been a giant test that continues, because it's about tipping the scales in your favor or whether or not you deserve that full-blown second chance. Because yeah, you're in your second chance, but you're more like that limbo 1.5 area, because truth be told is like, you've got a time limit, you got your death date, so you don't get your full second chance until you tip the scales more so in your favor, like Zeke did. But obviously we've seen now with the meth heads of like what could go wrong. So I think this whole thing is a test of trying to do the right thing. It's not like, oh, like having the option of, oh, we're going to sacrifice these people to save everyone as a whole. I think that's going to damn you in the end. And I think that's ultimately what Egan's going to do. I think Ben's going to try to find another way. Like, he's been very harsh about being the one that's going to save everybody. Like, but I think at the end of the day, his thing is to save everybody. It's not to cast anyone aside, because who's one of the people, if it comes out about Zombie's truth, like, it's probably Zombie's going to be one of the first people to be like, nah, kick her off the lifeboat. She murdered someone. She's not a good person. But that's also the thing of like, we've all done things we're not 100% proud of. I'm sure Egan, they'll throw out Egan, but he's like, what? I haven't done anything shady like murder somebody, you know? So it's all about second chances, about redemption and stuff like that. So I think hopefully it doesn't turn into a situation where Ben tries to abandon Zombie. Considering all that Zombie's done, it's like, yeah, she made that mistake, but the reasons why that came about. I'm also curious because eventually, like, you know, if Zombie does get arrested for like that, like, for one, that's going to expose the NSA for being involved. Like, it's like, oh, so how did her body get to New Orleans and everything? Which I'm sure Zombie's going to probably keep hush-hush about that. I don't know. Michaela's not acting on it right now, but obviously being around Jarrett and Sarah, it's like, you know her mom was murdered, but you're also kind of like, her mom was kind of an asshole, so I'm kind of fine with her being, yeah, so it's like, I don't know what the clear answer is going to be for this. It's definitely taking some interesting developments. Obviously there's the whole situation with Beverly, like, obviously, you know, and this speaks volumes, like, oh, they're trying to both help Beverly, like, oh, Jared and Zeke is like, no, let me hear, no, and then, like, she gets hurt, she's like, I need Michaela, and then Sarah's kind of stepping in as Michaela, and then obviously he is able to feel what Beverly feels, and she's kind of, like, calm and everything, and it's like, okay, it's good, and then, like, feeling the vibe from them, because he had told Michaela, like, he couldn't, like, turn it on and off, so if it came about, he's like, I'll try to, like, read her, but he's like, no, I'm glad you two found each other, so it's like, they're happy and everything. But when he's with Beverly, she immediately goes like, oh, because it's like, yo, like, yeah, Jarrett's with Sarah, that's his girlfriend, I'm with Michaela, I'm Zeke, her husband, and it's like, but you know, she married you because you had one, you were almost about to die. The fact that you had like one day left until you died, and like her and Jarrett have 12 years, and it's like, even I was like, whoa, that's creepy. Where's that coming from, Beverly? And then Zeke was like, whoa, can you feel what I'm feeling? And so I'm wondering, is it a byproduct of her condition, or is it kind of the flip side of Zeke's situation? And, you know, that in itself could be like a key factor, because it is a situation of not only understanding someone's feelings, but them understanding you. Because that's supposed to be the thing of like, that's the problem with like humanity in general. We can't always like, people, we're not willing to walk a mile in each other's shoe to understand where someone else is coming from. I think that could be like a big metaphor for that in this case of like, oh, he can literally walk a mile in someone's shoe because he knows exactly how they're feeling, but now it seems like he can also impart his feelings on them. Once again, maybe Beverly's like a crazy case. Maybe he can't do it to other 828ers, but maybe to regular people he can. Opens up a whole realm of possibilities of what that can necessarily look like in the future. So there's that. There's the Olive and Angelina situation. Like the moment's like, oh yeah, like your brunette hair and stuff like that, and then Angelina's kind of feeling her hair. I've gotten comments hitting me up about it too, like the whole thing about Angelina and just like how crazy this is getting. Side note, this show loves jumping all over the place. It's like, oh yeah, since it's been 33 days since last episode. I'm like, Jesus, because most shows don't make a point unless it's absolutely less necessary to tell you, like, I mean, because obviously some shows are very, like, procedural, so it's kind of like case of the week type of thing, so the time frame doesn't always get cleared, but obviously it's like, this show is kind of in real time to a certain extent, because it has been 7 years, in total, so it's been like 2 extra years since they returned, so, like, the time frame is kind of keeping up, so maybe that's why they do that, to kind of push the story narrative to kind of keep up with like the actual real time of outside the show. Maybe that's what it is. So that's just kind of interesting. It also showcases just like, oh yeah, that 5 years is going to be up faster than you think. But nevertheless, or that 5.5 years more specifically. But because it's supposed to be like 2024 when they die, right? I believe so. I could be mistaken. But immediately you could tell Olive wasn't feeling that, because it's like the moment like Angelina Rose, I was like, yeah, you were telling me like this. I think these designs for the restaurant are good. She's like, oh my God, that's so great. Olive is like super like, ugh. And I mean, to be fair, we've seen this probably escalating like for the past 33 days. It makes you wonder, did Cal actually bring it up? He probably accidentally brought it up to Olive, like, yeah, I saw Angelina in your clothes. She didn't want me to say anything. And so it's like, oh, if you want to, I can always take, it must be hard babysitting. It's like, no, it's not babysitting. Eden's my sister. She's like, no, she's like, yeah, I'm sure. And it's like, oh, like, Olive is definitely picking up on like those vibes. And then, like, it doesn't help until later on when she walks in, finds Angelina dyeing her hair black, and is like, whoa. She's like, what are you doing? You're trying to beat me? She's like, no, I'm not trying to take your family from you. It's just like, get out, leave. And it's just like, oh, man. And luckily, Grace was able to talk her down, because it is a thing of like, once again, it comes off a little creepy, but you also think about the fact is, once again, it's a conversation. I even had someone comment saying that they kind of felt the same way about the Pete thing of like, right, considering her circumstances, what she does is keep latching on to people. That's why her and Pete had such a fast whirlwind relationship, because it's like she's filling the hole in her heart from her family that, it comes off a little creepy, but it's like, yeah, there's honestly, there's a lot of psychological damage done there, considering what she's been through. Like, you can't fault her for doing that. It's just like, because for her, it's like, I don't want to replace you. I want to be like you. And, it's like, yeah, she, at the very least, the difference she brings up, like, oh, and I thought was so interesting how Grace ties it back into, like, oh, I remember someone who had some issues of their own after the plane disappeared. She's like, yeah, it's different. It's like, yeah, you have a system, you have a foundation. Like, you've had me, you had Danny, like, you had other people to be there with you. Angelina doesn't have anyone, so that's why she latches on, because in her mind it's like, you have it all. Like, you have the family, you have the siblings, you're basically in love, and obviously her love died in front of her eyes, so it's like she sees the you and Levi thing, and obviously it kind of resonates with her, I think, kind of looking retrospective, like, right, all that she kind of went through. So it's like, all right, you know what? I'm a little bit more sympathetic to Angelina's situation. So she rose up and finds Angelina with Levi, because at first it was like, Levi was like, oh, I thought you were Olive. And she's like, yeah, I think Olive hates me. And it's like, no, the moment that's happening and she's at the college, she was like, no, please don't do that, Angelina. And she tries to make a move on Levi. He's like, whoa. And she walks in on it. She's like, get out, leave. It's like, oh, dude, that turned bad. Once again, lifeboat stuff is curious, like... Once again, I think Angelina legitimately needs some psychological help, just like, because she's moving on, latching on to one person after another, and now the Stone family, just because she's trying to fill the void inside of her. And I think she legitimately needs help. I mean, look at Olive. Olive legitimately was in therapy, and I think it helped her in the long run, plus other elements. So I think it's a combination of having the Stone family be there for her, not being on her own. Granted, we don't know what that's going to do to Olive now that she feels like she has nothing. It was like, oh, I can't return to the Stone family. Olive hates me. Because it seems like in particular, Olive hating her hurts her the most. Especially because it's sad, because it's like, yeah, Olive was saying like, no, we're going to be friends and everything, until it's like, oh, you're trying to take my life? Middle finger to you, deuces, type of thing. So we'll see where things kind of go on that front. So there's that aspect to it. Then there's also the avenue with Samvi kind of apologizing about everything, but it's like, oh no, what you did, there's actually good work from it, because they ended up finding out that while playing the recording back, the wood for like milliseconds disappeared, and it's like, wait, what? And it's like, now we know how to control, like, whatever this miracle is, we were able to cause it ourselves. And man-made miracles like that, because you're stepping in like the divine of like humanity, It's not the same thing, but I'm assuming it's kind of like how, like, Prometheus gave humans fire, and the gods were like, nah, like, that's not yours to just give to humanity, So I think it might be kind of a similar thing. Obviously, I'm pulling from Greek mythology. I'm not well-versed in Greek mythology. I know a little bit here and there. That's about it. But, nevertheless, so there's that avenue with it, and it's like, okay, so now we can control it ourselves, and it's like, once again, you're tapping into some divine, something you don't fully understand, and this is, oh, it's going to go bad, and now we're leaning it, because we figured the wood would have something to do with the dark cloud, and it's like, I think once they try to create a miracle, it's going to cause a cataclysmic event, not like Well, we don't know the aftermath because obviously we have that dude Patrick and Troy's talking to him like, oh yeah, your device is your, human error on your part because he had picked up some seismic activity, and it's like, no, he's like, I think it's the equipment, but then he looked at basically there's like a whole bunch of small tremors underneath the facility. He's like, was it built on a fault line? He's like, no, there was no fault here, so it just happened to happen at 7:44. They don't know that that's exactly when the driftwood disappeared as well. So showcasing that them doing this is creating something's bubbling up and it's about to break. Like I said, we don't know whether this facility is going to be swallowed up by it, like what it's going to do. But like I said, a cataclysmic in the event of it'll swallow this whole place. But who knows, like whether it's going to be kind of like a similar to the ending. I was about to say, kind of like the Ripples. I was about to use a video game reference, but I'm like, no one's going to get that reference because no one listening is probably just played the video game, so I won't reference it. But it's like there's going to be ripple effects of whatever goes down there might trickle out to the rest of the world. What kind of effect it's going to have on the passengers? We saw what it did to Sanvi because of the lies and stuff like that, but they continued down its route because that was also the thing. No one else who was doing that to that piece of wood were affected, but it's like, even Michaela said it. It's like, yeah, but no one's us. We're special circumstance. Makes you wonder would it have like a similar effect on Zeke, considering he's not a passenger, but obviously, now that he's like survived his death date, would it have the same effect on him? That's also something that has to be compared and tracked because currently he's the only one that survived a death date, so he's a very like outlier compared to also like he's an outlier because he's not an 828er like everyone else is too, so many moving pieces to the puzzle. I am so excited to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.